All right, guys, welcome to the Proverbs Guy official YouTube channel. I am very thankful to have Dr. and Pastor Kent Hovind with us tonight, and he's going to be having a discussion with Christian Pike. Christian, you have decided, you and Pastor Hovind, that you're going to go first and give us your opening statements. They're going to be 10 minutes apiece, and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. First and foremost, I'm really appreciate Brother Hovind taking the time to do this. I've become very familiar with his work over the years, and I've always admired a lot of what he does. So even though he and I may not agree about everything this evening, I wanted to know that I greatly respect him and I appreciate his time.
Well, thank you.
There's two parts of the discussion that I had proposed to him, assuming we have time to get to the second part. The first part was on a Darwinian worldview and morphological change. And so I just prepared a bit of an opening statement for this, and then I'll pass it over to him. If it runs over 10 minutes, it shouldn't be by very much. Hopefully it doesn't. So if y'all just bear with me, I did prepare a statement for this. To say that Charles Darwin was wrong and ignorant is an incredibly irresponsible position, and it will do more harm than good to our Christian youth. Charles Darwin did not decide upon or invent natural selection, but rather he discovered it. Until his time, it was not understood that nature had a similar selection process to the one that humans had been using in domestication. The fact that you and I take for granted that animals can adapt to their changing environment, and that the process by which they do that is descent with inherent modification through natural selection, selecting the fittest organisms to survive and reproduce, we take that for granted because of Darwin. The entire world of biology and biodiversity was pushed forward by decades or even centuries because of his work. That is a matter of historical record. We know for sure that his observations and general theories are correct. He referred to that information as evolution by natural selection. We commonly call it descent with inherent modification. This has absolutely nothing to say about the origins of life, but only deals with the origin of species. We know that speciation occurs, and that it occurs to such a degree that interbreeding becomes completely impossible. That was his idea, and in scientific history, they have a tradition of giving credit by using a person's name. Therefore, we now know about biodiversity. What we now know about it, and what it is called and what it should be called, is the Darwinian view of life. This is similar to the phrase Newtonian physics. Darwin did not know anything about genetics. He did not know how the process of mutation worked. He had no way of checking any of his theories by the genome to see if there was any support at that level. We now know that there is support at that level, and we use the very same technology to determine relatedness between a human father and child. Once again, that does not necessarily mean that one must extrapolate to the nth degree with assumptions, but rather that genetics are viable at some level in determining relatedness. This obviously strengthens our understanding of the accuracy of a Darwinian view of biodiversity. It's my understanding that the modern genetics that have been used to reinforce this view of biology is called neo-Darwinism. The word evolution has been somewhat hijacked to mean that abiogenesis is true and that all forms of life are provably related. That isn't what that word means, and that isn't what Darwin used it for in his initial publication. That isn't to say that he himself didn't at some point adopt these ideas, but rather it's to say that the word evolution doesn't refer to that. The word evolution means descent with inherent modification, and it is a fact of life. Darwin deserves the credit for this and for the recognition of natural selection. The fact that he didn't yet understand genetics is similar to the fact that Isaac Newton didn't understand relativity. All good scientific ideas are continually built upon and adjusted to account for new information, as they should be. Nobody would ever suggest that we should just hold to Newton and discount Einstein. Yet some YEC proponents seem to make the case that science is somehow less authentic because it must remain open-minded. Under any kind of scrutiny, this doesn't hold up. We all, once faced with the details, know that science is right to remain open to new information. Newton was right, and so Einstein, building upon that level of knowledge, was able to further our understanding of the subject. Darwin was right, and so, for instance, Richard Dawkins, with modern genetic research, was able to build upon that and make the field of study stronger and more robust. This is the greatest strength of science, yet has been misused to represent a weakness. If someone feels uncomfortable with the word evolution, due to its hijacking, then I have no issue whatsoever with that person using a different word so as to distance themselves from the false meaning. There should be another word that refers to the most extreme assumptions about evolution, and I would be in favor of a clearer dividing line there. I agree with Brother Hovind that the schools misrepresent things to the kids. They represent that all life is known to be related. That is not known, that is theorized. They should present what is known and what is theorized as theorized. Obviously, an atheist is going to look to some natural process, such as evolution by natural selection, to explain the origins of life. We're speaking of abiogenesis, but you get the point. Obviously, an atheist will do that because they don't have an alternative. We as Christians know that God made the world and all that's in it, and so we don't feel the need to extrapolate these fields of information to fill the gaps in our mind. We're not looking for an explanation for the origin of life, but rather we are studying the process of biodiversity. That is the original meaning of evolution. Back to my original point about it being irresponsible to continually cast a negative shadow over Darwin and his contributions. I'd like to share a personal story. My grandfather, who was a very great man and a great minister, had a real problem with parents teaching their young children to believe in Santa Claus. While some might just consider him a stickler, I find his reasoning to be very sound. He would explain that you are lying to your kids. First and foremost, that is a way of teaching your children that it's okay to lie, which, if they follow that example, will send them to hell. The Bible plainly teaches that all liars have their part in the lake of fire. While the Santa myth may seem harmless, it sets the precedent that the truth is allowed to be suspended. Those kids are going to grow up one day, and when they do, they'll realize that Santa doesn't exist. And at that very moment, they will also realize that you were lying to them. I believe that this runs the risk of opening their mind to question everything you ever told them about the unseen truths of life, such as the invisible God that the Bible tells us about. You're setting the kids up for skepticism against God and the Bible. I fear a similar consequence with the continued and irresponsible misinformation that YEC proponents give to children about Charles Darwin and his contribution to science. Those kids are going to grow up one day. And when they do, they're going to get away from you and go out into the real world. Eventually, at least some of them will come in contact with the very real information that shows the genius of Charles Darwin. That's going to cause a conflict in their mind due to what you told them as a child. Many of them will be persuaded that you weren't honest, and when that happens, they're going to question everything you ever told them, including what you told them about religion. You have often stated, Brother Hovind, that we don't see an animal produce anything other than its kind. The word kind being used there to suggest an obvious related relative and offspring which makes sense to have been produced. That's a misleading point. If we were to observe a Siberian wolf give birth to a teacup poodle, that would constitute a complete suspension of the laws of nature and a miracle. And yet we know, you know, that the wolf did in fact produce the poodle over successive generations, and that subsequent mutations were required and selected for this process. We've got to quit with the gotchas and just start giving logical responses to the honest inquiries of people. It is not necessary to accept all of the most extreme assumptions and implications of a Darwinian worldview in order to just accept what is true and what we know and observe. We take natural selection for granted as though it's obvious, but that's because Darwin discovered and wrote about it. He was a breakthrough scientist who changed the world. We now think that it's just obvious that zebras and horses share a common ancestor, but that's only known to us because of Darwin. We need to find a better way to teach the Christian youth because this way leaves them vulnerable to the subtle influences of Satan. Do I have a couple more minutes, Stephen?
You have 2 more minutes.
Okay, I'm almost done if y'all just bear with me. God's design for the sphere of biology, plants and animals, is obviously much more comprehensive and amazing than we ever realized. The ability that life has to be malleable and adjust itself to an ever-changing world is truly remarkable and only serves to validate the greatness and wisdom of our Creator, who we are told foreknew all things. He made the necessary preparations due to his foreknowledge of equipping all living things with the ability to mutate and adapt. In the light of the discovery of Darwin and the subsequent work that has been done since his time, we must humbly acknowledge that we have no idea what the plants and animals of Genesis must have looked like or been. We may have some inclination as to the vague categories of life that were created, but we now know that life has been adapting and changing ever since that time, and radically so. This clearly runs a parallel of the changed creature that the apostle spoke of. He told us that all natural things make evident the spiritual things, and that we are without excuse. The fact that creatures change in this natural world was discovered to bring our attention back to our outer creature being changed into the glorious image of the Son of God. The Bible says that the truth shall make us free. I am interested in what's true, not what's comfortable, not what I learned growing up, not what my intuition seems to think makes sense, but what's true. What's true, God said, would free me. If something is true, and if we choose to hide from it and not face it head on, then I fear we are submitting ourselves to bondage. And with that, I'll pass it over.
All right, that is almost perfect timing. Thank you,
Oh, cool.
Brother Christian, for keeping that time. Pastor Hovind, it is now your turn to give your opening statements and what you believe on the subject.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. And Christian, I appreciate you presenting your case, what you believe. You got about 50 points. I'd like to respond to each one, but I couldn't write fast enough. So we'll take what I can remember and you go back. I believe the Bible is very clear that God made everything in 6 literal 24-hour days, and that he made them to bring forth after their kind or after their sort. That's what the Bible clearly teaches. Uses that word kind or sort 24 times in the first 7 chapters. I think you want to be sure we get the point. This is all that anybody has ever observed. There are now 339 recognized breeds of dogs, and they might have had a common ancestor called a dog. Okay,
Brother
or
Hovind,
wolf
your
or
mic
something
got a
like
little
that.
bit quiet.
Let's see. Say that again.
Your mic got a little bit quiet. I'm sorry. I just wanted to let you know.
Somebody tried to call me. His wife.
Oh, okay, yeah. It sounds better now.
I had to tell him to call back. Okay, I get called. You saw my daughter's wedding, right? On America's Funniest Home Videos. I get phone rings all the time. So, Christian, I think you are defending a very ungodly, unscientific position. What Darwin discovered on his 14 kinds of finches on the Galapagos Islands was exactly what the Bible says. They're still a finch. They're still a bird. He did not see them change to anything else. Nobody ever has. So to believe that finches and pine trees are related is fairy tale stuff. He didn't observe anything that would lead to that conclusion. As far as which ones are the same kind, the animals know that. Let them all loose in the woods. They'll figure it out. The cows show no interest whatsoever in mating with the trees or the chickens. None. They know what another cow is that they're looking for. So God said they would bring forth after their kind or after their sort. That's all we've ever seen. The position that you are promoting is completely unscriptural, that's for sure. That's not what the Bible says. There's no evidence for this evolution you're talking about anyway. You are right that they see varieties of dogs, varieties of birds, varieties of a lot of things. That's true. But the varieties are limited. They've been trying to get bigger cows for a long time to give more beef. Okay. World record today is about 2,000 pound or 2,200 pound cow. That's a big cow. You think they'll ever get a cow as big as Texas and weigh 4 trillion tons? No, there's a limit in there somewhere. You think they'll ever get a cow as big as an elephant? No, there are animals as big as an elephant, though, like an elephant. So I think what Charlie observed is variations within the same kind, and he came up with an interesting method of how that happens, and that's very true. Natural selection selects certain animals to survive in certain conditions. If you turned all the dogs in the world loose in the woods in Alaska, after 5 years, go back and see what's left. 95% of the dogs would not survive. Only those with long hair and a wolf-like body, long hair, shorter legs, thicker, denser body to hold the heat better, rather than a dingo with skinny legs and skinny body. They can't hold their heat, and short hair wouldn't survive. Nature would select a certain body type to survive in Alaska. Nature would select a different body type to survive in the desert. That would be the dingo this time. The wolf would not survive. His long hair becomes a detriment. So Darwin was right to see variations happen, and nature selects certain variations to survive. I agree. That's where it stops. Where he went off bonkers off the chart was to say, wow, we see 300 kinds of dogs, therefore dogs are related to bananas. You can look at the family trees they show in the textbook. They've got every life form, bananas, dogs, pine trees, everything, and humans going back to a common ancestor. That is not science. That's a religious worldview unsupported by any scientific evidence. The Darwinian worldview is a mixture of science and religion. It is scientific to say Darwin's finches came from a finch. It is not scientific to put those on a chart with a bird and a line on paper connecting them to a dinosaur and an elephant and a frog. That's not science. That's religion. People believe in that part of evolution. That's why I very carefully in my seminars define the word evolution with 6 different levels or stages. First, you have to have cosmic evolution, the origin of time, space, matter. Where did that come from? The Big Bang does not answer that question. It's a silly, stupid religious worldview that nothing created everything in a Big Bang. Secondly, you have to have chemical evolution. If the Big Bang created hydrogen and maybe some helium and lithium, where did uranium, platinum, gold, and iron come from? There are 92 naturally occurring elements plus the synthetic ones. You're going to get that from helium, gas, hydrogen? They don't ever answer that, but how do you get all the chemicals to make everything in the world from hydrogen? First 2 steps are pure baloney. They don't happen. Then you'd have to have organic evolution. Life has to get started somewhere along the line. Where did life get started? Then you have to have what is commonly called macroevolution, where an animal changes into a different kind. This has never been observed. What we've ever seen is variations within the kind, like the dogs producing a variety of dogs or Darwin's finches producing a variety of finches. That's been observed. That is science. But it's not, I'm looking at the wrong camera, I guess. It's not religion. It's not science, it's a religion to believe anything other than variations happening within the kind. So Darwin's birds, he wrote his book, Origin of Species, and he said on page 170 of the copy that I have, he talked about all the varieties of finches. Now there he just went bonkers. That is not science. To see 14 kinds of birds and conclude birds are related to oak trees is stupid. Tell him I said so. That's not science. So you said there's morphological change. I agree, Christian, and there are limits to those changes. There are genetic limits. There are natural limits. You're not going to get a dog as big as Tennessee. It can't happen. So there are limits. I think everybody under pressure would agree, yes, there are limits. Just where are the limits is what they would differ on. I think we should go with science. The word science means knowledge. What do we know? What do we observe? What do we study? What do we test? We observe dogs make dogs. That we observe. We don't observe dogs and pine trees being related. They've got a line on paper in the textbooks connecting them. That's not science. It's a religious worldview. I wish they would admit it. And you say to say that Darwin was wrong is irresponsible. Well, then I guess I'm irresponsible. Darwin was wrong. He saw variations of birds and jumped to the conclusion that birds are related to bananas and oak trees. That's stupid. Darwin was wrong. You can mark me down, call me irresponsible. He was wrong. Let's see. The entire world of biology was pushed forward by centuries. Oh, you are so wrong about that. Darwin did the greatest hindrance to scientific research that's ever happened in the history of science. He discovered nothing new. He discovered what everybody already knew. Every farmer on the planet would tell you when you plant corn, you're going to get corn. And the farmers have for centuries, for millennia, have been working to get cows to give more milk or more beef, handle the heat better, whatever their environment is. They raise a particular strain of cow or corn or whatever for their environment. Maybe it's their soil type if they're planting crops. But that there's a limit. All we see are variations within the kind. Society where is a non-selective, where the weak is protected. He said, I'm surprised that a Christian would defend the idea that this is the process which God more or less set up in order to have evolution. He said that Australian Broadcasting Company in 1976.
Are you able to hear me, Brother Hovind?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. You were kind of in and out, so I wasn't sure if that was going both ways. Okay, so
I apologize.
Yeah, no, it happens, man. I've been there. Okay, so I maybe not was as clear as I needed to be in my opening statement. I tried to be concise because of the time, but I stated 2 and maybe 3 times in there that I didn't think that we should teach the assumed extrapolations of natural selection as a fact. So I think maybe you're making a bit of assumptions about my position, which I tried to clear up, but I may not have been clear about. My point of saying that Darwin was a great contributor was that Darwin was the first one to document the phenomenon of natural selection, which has greatly furthered our understanding of biology. And in that way, he was a breakthrough scientist. Do you not agree with that?
Well, natural selection, yes, but natural selection only selects. It doesn't create anything. It doesn't change anything to a different kind of animal. You could turn all the dogs in the world in Alaska, and nature would select the coyote or the wolf type body to survive, thick fur. So you guys want to give this selection process creative ability, and that's the problem. Natural selection only selects what's already available. So, Christian, to simplify it real simple, do you believe if we went back millions of years, thousands of trillions of generations, you are related to a pine tree? Do you and a pine tree have a common ancestor, Christian? Just a simple yes or no.
I do not believe so, no.
There is a limit to how much variation they can get. You believe you're related to a coyote or a wolf if you go back far enough?
No.
Do the textbooks teach that to the kids?
Yes.
Do you do anything to stop that?
Well, I put it in my opening statement that I disagreed with it, so I did that.
Okay. Would you agree that that part of what they do teach in evolution is actually not science? It's not observable. There's a limit.
Yes,
okay?
Absolutely.
So Darwin discovered natural, I don't know if he discovered it, I think people have known for a long time that nature would select certain kinds to survive. That's why farmers build fences to keep the coyotes out and make their cow that produces a lot of milk survive, because it wouldn't survive without the fence and the protection of the farmer. So where exactly is the limit then? Do you believe dogs and horses are related?
No.
So what are you arguing for Darwin for? Because he believed dogs and horses were related.
Well, one of the things I tried to differentiate in the opening, like I said, I had to make it concise, of course, so it wasn't very detailed. But one of the things that I tried to differentiate in that was what Darwin discovered versus what Darwin believed. I share your opinion that much of what is taught to children as factual knowledge is certainly not factual knowledge. But I think that same reasoning works in reverse when you take the credit away from somebody for what they did do. I'm sure you're very familiar with examples like the horse's foot or wild maize turning into corn. There have been documented radical morphological changes that, kind is a bit of a slippery concept, but there is change in nature. And, when we use examples like Texas isn't the size scale that we're looking at. Biology gets as big as blue whales. It gets as big as elephants. It gets as big as hippos. It doesn't get as big as Texas. So we have to look at examples that would make sense.
Right. Well, that's what I'm pointing out. The textbooks do have these family trees with all their forms going back. Darwin said all plants and animals have a common ancestor. He believed he was related to a strawberry.
But he did not discover that, Brother Hovind. He thought that. That's different.
Well, I don't think he discovered anything.
Why don't you think that?
Well, you're saying that he discovered natural selection. You mean nobody knew until Darwin that the cold weather would kill off the animals with thin fur?
Well, I mean, that's a bit like saying that nobody knew anything about physics before Newton. We did know things, but Newton's theory clarified the issue. Darwin's theory clarified our understanding of how biodiversity comes about.
And that's where I would strongly disagree. I think Darwin muddied the water so badly that people still today can't see through it. All he saw was what people already knew. 14 kinds of finches on the islands. They had a common ancestor. Some of the islands only had tough nuts to crack, and only the finches with a big beak could survive. Good observation, Charlie. They already had a beak. They've already been living off that island for centuries before he got there. So he did not discover anything. He made a wild guess, a religious statement that all the animals and all the plants have a common ancestor. And people have been teaching his religion ever since. And it's sad that so many followers of this silly idea are out there teaching that, finches and pine trees are related. He believed that. And he taught that. And they are teaching that to our kids in school. The Bible says that God made everything in 6 literal 24-hour days. Do you believe that?
No.
Okay. The Bible says God made the plants on one day and the animals on the next day. You don't believe that either if you don't believe the 6 days.
I do believe that. I do actually believe that.
Well, the Bible says there was a worldwide flood that destroyed everything, and Noah took two of each kind on the ark. Do you believe that story?
I do.
Okay. There's a website called baraminology.com based on the Hebrew word baram that says there's probably 8,000 kinds of animals had to go on the ark. 8,000 pairs of animals, which could easily fit on a boat that size, especially if Charlie. I mean, if Noah took babies of everything, which would be common sense. After the floods, they live longer, they take up less room, they eat less, they poop less. So it's common sense to bring small or young of everything on the ark. Do you believe dinosaurs lived with man?
I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence on that one.
Well, the Bible says nothing died before Adam's sin. Romans 5, 1 Corinthians. So was there any death before man came on the scene?
Well, I think you misunderstand my statement, Brother Hovind. What I'm trying to say is there's a difference in stating a positive position on something and then saying, well, I'm kind of shooting from the hip. You know, if you look at Charles Darwin made the positive position that he stated, where he said that through natural processes, organisms become modified. And then he wrote about that, and that became sort of adopted as biology canon going forward. And so that's totally different than him saying, well, I think that means this. Those are two very different things. I'm simply in defense of what he discovered, not what he decided. And I think you're undervaluing what he discovered.
Well, no, I think I'm being realistic. He didn't discover it. People already knew that.
They didn't.
They already knew cold weather would kill certain
record.
animals, hot weather would kill certain animals. They already knew certain animals. The people in India, where it's really hot, raise cows that have a dew flap to be able to radiate more body heat, and they have a big hump on their back. They can survive droughts. That's the kind of cow that survives over there. People already knew. And it's a certain
But people already knew that wood floats and rocks sink before Newton, but they didn't really know why.
I don't know that they didn't know why. It's kind of a general statement there. So
I'm just
the
saying
purpose of
there is a way of consolidating those ideas and making it more comprehensive.
Well, so is your purpose and your position then you're trying to simply defend Darwin?
I'm just defending. I think, like I said in the statement, I think it's very irresponsible to just sort of hand wave away such a major part of what we understand about the world, which was the Darwinian view of selection.
Okay. Yeah, you can call me irresponsible then, because I don't think he discovered that at all. People already knew that. Nature selects certain things. Temperature selects them. Climate selects them. Available food. Some animals can survive longer with no water, and so the camel does really good. But nature didn't create that. It selected a trait that already existed. God created the animals with a variety. People can handle a wide range of conditions. Okay, there are people they're better than the warm weather, but they're still with other people. Yeah, I guess I don't understand the purpose of what this whole debate. Are you trying to say you want me to praise Charlie Darwin? He said, you can read his book, page 170. It's a wonderful fact that all animals and all plants throughout all time and space should be related to each other. That's irresponsible. That's nonsense.
You're breaking up a little bit, Brother Hovind.
Yeah, I know. That's lousy. I got one bar flashing at me.
Can I respond to that?
We'll do it again. Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with your point that what he said in that instance was irresponsible. I have no qualms with that whatsoever. It obviously was irresponsible. And it's very irresponsible to teach that as though that is solid in the same way that natural selection is solid, because it's not. Obviously, it's not. But this is kind of what I'm trying to point out. Do you believe that Martin Luther was a great reformer that helped the church history?
I do not. I think he was a heretic.
Okay, well, let me comment on why I think he was great. Martin Luther taught that the just shall live by faith and that the selling of indulgences ain't getting nobody nowhere.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And
I thought you meant Martin Luther King.
Okay. No, I'm sorry, Martin Luther.
Martin Luther, I think he did a lot of good. I would disagree with quite a few things he believed. I was raised Lutheran.
That's the point I'm getting around to. That's the point I'm getting around to. Martin Luther, 95+% of his doctrine was pure Catholic tradition.
Right.
But he did have a few percent that was very, very true and very, very breakthrough to the Christian understanding, which greatly increased the collective consciousness of people about the scriptures. So even the little bit of truth that he had was still valuable, regardless of the bukus of Catholic tradition that he carried with him. Charles Darwin contributed greatly, regardless of the bad stuff. I think it's foolish to tell kids that Darwin was some kind of an idiot, because he wasn't. Natural selection is a breakthrough idea that we don't know when it would have came about. It could have been 50 years, 100 years. How far behind would our understanding of biology be if he had never been born?
Well, that's right. I think you're giving him way too much credit. People already knew that. I don't think he discovered anything. He's the one who took it way outside the bounds of science and said, wow, look at these 14 finches. Therefore, finches are related to apples. That's what he taught. I just read you the quote, page 170 of his book. So I don't know of anything he added to biology or anything to the field of science. I taught biology for years. I'll debate any atheist revolutionist you can find on that topic. There's no evidence of any animal or plant ever producing offspring other than its kind. You can't use a fossil as evidence because you don't know that's related to anything today. I've said many times, when you find a fossil, all you know is it died. You don't know it produced any children. You sure don't know it had different children. No animal today can produce babies other than their same kind. Cows produce cows, goats produce goats. We got a bunch right here. They do it all the time. Rabbits make rabbits. There just is no evidence for what Darwin speculated. He was a religious racketeer. Maybe it might be a better word. Used it to make money and become famous. So no, you got to try somebody else, I guess, if you want me to praise Darwin. You're not going to get it out of me. I think he was a heretic. I think he did more damage than good to biology.
Let me reiterate one point from my opening statement. One of the things I said in the opening statement was a reaction to something I've heard you say many times, and maybe you'll want to respond to this. You and I would agree that things bring forth after their kind because we agree on the scriptures. I think perhaps we just disagree on how exactly that word kind was meant to be understood, perhaps. I just told you I don't believe that I'm related to a pine tree, but that doesn't resolve the issue of the limits of morphological change. And this is a whole field of science. So we just cancel it and stop looking at it. The point I wanted to reiterate was this. You say that we don't see anything bring forth anything other than its kind, which, is generally a statement I've heard you make numbers of times. I know that that doesn't mean what it sounds like, but I think it's important for the audience, for the example that I gave in the opening statement. You would never expect to see a Siberian wolf bring forth a teacup poodle. So that's a little bit misleading to word it that way.
Okay. I think dog breeders around the world have done this very thing. My wife's mother and all of her family was in this for years, made a lot of money breeding what I would consider useless dogs, okay? Pugs and poodles and stuff like that, okay? Yep. They will tell you there's a limit, and they will tell you the further you get away from the normal average mutt. Take a Siberian wolf for your example. I think you could selectively breed the puppies coming from Siberian wolves and gradually get smaller or dumber or curly hair or straight hair or less hair. They already have hair. You're not going to grow feathers on that dog. Any of them. None of them are going to get feathers, okay, or wings. All you're doing is selecting a trait that already exists and emphasizing that. People can do the same thing. You could keep getting taller people to get married, taller and taller. Pretty soon you got a whole herd of tall people. But they're still people, and there's a limit. They're not going to get 40 feet tall. So to go from a Siberian wolf to a poodle, as you mentioned, certainly that would take many generations and probably could be done again. But that's artificial selection. That's happening for the humans doing it. And it's not improving the dog any. You think a poodle's better off than a Siberian wolf?
But the point is, it is morphologically changing.
It has changed within limits. Did you add anything? They still had two bones in the forelimb, radius and ulna. They still have a humerus. They still have a pelvic girdle. They still have the backbone. They still have ears. What exactly are you calling morphological change? It's still a dog. It's recognizable as a dog. So that's not evolution.
I think me and you may disagree a little on that. And I agree with you generally that it's still the kind of animal that a dog is. But to say that a Siberian wolf and a Chihuahua are obviously recognizably the same thing, I don't think a 5-year-old would conclude that.
I think we can get a 5-year-old. Line up a Siberian wolf, a dog, a poodle, a banana, and an oak tree. And say, kids, which two go together?
If you lined up the Siberian wolf, the wild island boar, the black panther, and the Chihuahua would stand out among the other three.
Well, I think the Chihuahua and the wolf would still the same kind. But see,
I'm not saying they're not the same kind. I'm just saying the theory is maybe a little bit more extreme than you want to give it credit for. That's all.
Well, my point is, this is not what's taught in schools. Darwin observed variations. Everybody's observed variations. My children are different than me, but they're still human. So the variations happen, but they happen within limits. Darwin extrapolated that to say, oh, everything's related. That is criminal to teach that to kids. That's not science.
It is
You don't
criminal to
observe.
teach that we know it. I agree with you because we don't know
They
it.
do teach it like it's a fact.
Well, I agree with you. That's what I'm saying. I don't
Yeah.
send my kids to that crazy public school.
Okay, good. You mentioned we should see in Darwin's breakthrough theory the greatness and wisdom of the Creator.
Yes.
I so strongly disagree with that.
Well, let me explain
That-
the statement.
Okay.
This is what I mean. When I'm giving credit to Charles Darwin, all I'm saying is that there have been men throughout history that have noticed phenomenon and worked on that to develop a better understanding of it, and Darwin's one of those men. If Darwin discovered, for instance, that birds had, adapted to change to different environments, well, that tells us something about the world, that without any human involvement, without any artificial selection, that the nature that God set up, that animals have the ability to be somewhat malleable and to change and ever adapt and shift themselves. I think it shows the design of God as being much more intricate than just static creatures that look the same forever, which we know, of course, that they don't look the same forever.
Right. I agree. God gave the creatures the ability to produce a variety that some survive in different climates. God was very smart to put in the gene code some flexibility. So some of the dogs have longer hair, some have shorter hair, some have longer legs, shorter legs. There's a great variety of apples or bananas. Pick your fruit, pick your animal. There's a lot of varieties. I think there are 12,000 varieties of bees. Probably had a common ancestor called a bee. Some can live off certain flowers better than others. They have a special adaptation, special creation to get the nectar out of certain flowers. There's hummingbirds that have a curved beak. They're the only ones can pollinate certain flowers. I think God was really smart, gave a variety, a lot of variations within the same kind. But see, Darwin wants to extrapolate that to say everything's related. And that's what I'm saying. A is not science, and B is criminal to teach that to kids. So that's God did give a variety. General Motors puts a heater and an air conditioner in a whole lot of their vehicles. That's planning ahead. Some go to cold climate, some go to warm climate. That's not adaptation. It's designed into it. So I think they've designed into the gene code where if you turned all the dogs, back to the example, turn all the dogs in the world loose in Alaska, only a certain body type would survive, probably the wolf or the husky. That's not, it didn't create anything.
I think the place that me and you are disagreeing, Brother Hovind, is as far as the original Darwinian theory is concerned, the factual side of the theory, that's what he meant by evolution.
Well, Darwin, he said very clearly what he meant. He said he looked at these variations of a variety of animals, particularly he's most famous for the Galapagos, the birds there, finches. But his conclusion from that was that they're related to tomatoes.
Well, he drew the wrong conclusion. I will agree with you on that.
Well, then that's not good science. That's religion. He's a religious zealot. That's all he is.
But I think that goes back to the example with Martin Luther. I mean, I'm sure there are things that Isaac Newton was very superstitious about because they were not enlightened in his time. That doesn't take away from what he was right about.
Right. Okay. And you say Darwin was great because he discovered natural selection. I've already said it 3 times. I'll say it again. I don't think he discovered it. I think people already knew that.
Any evidence of that.
Well, I think people already knew that.
But he wrote about it. He explained it. He documented examples of it. Who else did that?
Well, if you took all the finches in the world and turned them loose on one of those islands where they only had tough nuts to crack, only the finches with a heavy beak would survive.
Correct.
People already knew that.
I think you're taking that for granted.
Well,
I don't think there's any historical record to back that up.
Okay. Darwin couldn't get a job. His dad wanted him to become a preacher, sent him to the Anglican school to be a preacher. And nobody wanted to hire him. So his dad pulled a few strings, political strings, and got him a job, an unpaid naturalist for 5 years. He's going to sail around the world for 5 years and collect bugs and birds. He hated birds. He shot every bird he could find because he hated birds. He thought it was mean for them to eat worms, and he liked worms.
Brother Hovind,
so
if I could
shot all the birds he could.
What does that have to do with the theory?
Well, you're saying he's a great man. I'm saying he's a loser. He's a washout. Okay. He couldn't
Albert
get a job.
Einstein was a really bad person in the patent office. He was terrible at doing patents.
Maybe so.
It's true. He was. He was really bad in the patent office, but he was really good at theoretical physics.
But you're changing the subject.
No, you were changing the subject.
Okay. Darwin only discovered what people already knew, that given natural conditions, certain types of a given animal will survive. People already knew that. He may have elucidated it better than others had done, and his book may have some good points on that. But it's like, I'm not going to dig through the cow pie to find a cherry. That's what it is with Darwin's book. There may be a few cherries in there. I'm not hungry enough to dig through the cow pie to get to it.
I can understand that position. My granddad actually used to have an analogy about television where he would say it's like going through the dumpster to get a biscuit. But
right.
I could totally appreciate that position. I think you and I are just sort of at an impasse on the actual value of his discovery, which is fine. Okay. I had a couple examples I wanted to go over just for us to talk to the audience a little bit about the limits that we accept, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
The first one, I got notes on my iPhone. Hold on. I threw all this stuff together earlier today, so I hope it's pretty good. The first one I want to talk about was corn. I'm sure you're very familiar with the evolution of corn, et cetera. So
I'm sorry, evolution of what?
Corn.
The history. Okay, coming from maize, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to talk about corn just a little bit. Okay. Let me see. All right. So there's an ancient plant that the South Americans and Central Americans, I believe it was also the Central. I know it was the South Americans and maybe also the Central Americans. They discovered in the wild. It was called, I think you pronounce it teosinte. I'm not a biologist, but teosinte. It was this weird plant, had multiple stalks, buds, whatever. So they started crossbreeding it with wild maize, and they kind of came up with this proto-corn-esque kind of thing. Well, as that furthered and the Indians began to kind of, that process made it up into North America is the best way they understand it, is that's when we started seeing the big bulbous corn. But if you look at teosinte, it had multiple stalks, not one stalk. And if you look at early maize, it had kind of narrowed itself down to one stalk, but it was sort of brambly. And then if you follow that up through the crossbreeding process and all this kind of things, we don't usually judge plants with the same degree of scrutiny that we do animals. But if we did, going from a multi-stalked plant that looks like a weed to a very tall single stalk plant that's growing these huge bulbous fruits, that is a major morphological change that we know for sure happened. So all I'm saying is, do you not feel that maybe you're undervaluing the theory a little bit?
Well, no, because it is so overvalued in our public school system. I think I'm trying to bring a common sense balance. It was the farmers who did this, changing what maize is what they typically start with in South Brazil or wherever it came from, into our modern corn. Sure. The modern corn stalk, there are now how many varieties of corn? Sweet corn, white corn, popcorn, all kinds. Another example would be taking the wild mustard plant and developing it to get more of the seed or more of the stalk. You mentioned about the corn stalk is now taller. It already had a stalk. It didn't create wings on it or feathers.
But it used to have multiple stalks, Brother Hovind.
Okay. So they went from multiple to one. That's losing, not gaining. That's not creating anything.
Would you accept that a snake lost multiple legs to have none?
No snakes ever lost legs.
Isn't that similar to what you just said, though?
Show me the science behind this.
I'm just saying the idea of losing something being acceptable in any situation.
Well, how does that? So if you lose everything, you eventually have it all? Is that your theory?
No, I'm just saying that we judge plants usually with a different measuring stick because we don't see plants as obviously similar to ourselves. But if that was an animal that went from multiple appendages to one appendage, we would take note of that as being a radical change.
Well, there have been some animals that have lost limbs permanently, apparently. That's, again, it's a loss. It's not a gain. I don't know if the emus ever could fly. They've got little stubby wings now that appear kind of useless. They use them in running for balance, but maybe to impress the girls. I don't know what they use those little wings for. We don't know. I can't think like an emu. But they probably had, they may have had bigger wings, but it's an example of losing, not gaining. Let's see, the evolution charts in the textbooks say we went from an amoeba, which doesn't have any legs at all, or wings, or feathers, or eyes, or nose, or ears, and turned it into a human, which has all of those things. That's criminal to teach that to kids in a science book. It's religious. The wild mustard plant, all they've done is collect something that's already existing. We could go to a village of people, isolate them off, and select only those over 6 feet tall can survive. Everybody else under 6 feet is shot. After a few generations, you got a whole tribe of 6-foot people. That didn't create anything.
No, but that is the original definition of evolution by natural selection.
Right. But that case would be artificial selection.
Well, yeah, but you know what I'm saying.
But see, it is, listen to me, selecting. It's not creating. But you guys want to give this natural selection force creative ability. It doesn't create anything. I'm sorry. Do you believe that the family trees where they show an amoeba slowly turning into everything else? Oh, you mentioned the Siberian wolf becoming a poodle. Was anything new created? What does the poodle have that the wolf does not? Besides
quite a bit of a different keratin in the fur.
It still has hair. It's more curly. That's all.
Well, I mean, my point is there were mutations that occurred, and those mutations did create a different animal.
Well, the mutations, all mutations that have ever been observed are harmful, fatal, or neutral. Nobody's seen a good one that adds any information. We have some ducks.
I don't understand that point of view, because the process of natural selection, which all of us agree happens, means that the fittest animal survives. Well, natural selection happens because a variety is produced by mutations, and the ones that survive because of their mutations. So how can you not accredit those mutations?
We don't know that it survived from its mutations. Because of its mutations, it's really not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the luckiest most of the time. Many animals would not survive without somebody babysitting them or protecting them. I mean, if lightning hits a herd of buffalo, it's not survival of the fittest. Who was standing too close to the lightning? That's all.
Well, but the lightning thing's a bit anecdotal.
All of human history. I didn't hear lightning's anecdotal. What?
The lightning example is a bit anecdotal. It's not indicative of the majority of those instances.
Okay. Well, let's take an extremely cold winter comes in. Extremely cold winter. The dogs that don't have real thick fur die off. Next spring, the only ones there to make puppies are the ones that have thick fur.
But Brother Hovind, that makes my point.
Right. I agree. Natural selection works.
But my point is, that's a mutation. That's a mutation.
Okay. Do you think any of those dogs are going to develop central heating system, natural gas or propane?
I want to stay, as you often put it, one topic at a time.
Okay.
To make the statement that mutations are always bad is obviously not true.
No, I'd like you to show me an example of a good mutation that added information.
Added information is what does that mean? We just talked about thicker fur being good.
Well, it already had fur. And already had thick fur, or wouldn't have survived it. Okay, only the ones with thick fur survived that first cold winter.
Right, because of the mutation.
You think they have a mutation to make them make thicker fur?
How do you think the thicker fur got there, Brother Hovind?
I think it's in the genetic code to make fur.
But no, what I'm saying, why do you think that one wolf had thicker fur than the other wolf? Because that wolf experienced a mutation in the litter.
Well, just like the humans and their hair. Some humans have more hair than others. It's still hair.
No, I'm just saying the point is you can't say mutations are always bad, because that's an example of one being beneficial.
So you think the wolf having thicker fur is a mutation? I think you'd have to demonstrate that.
What is a mutation?
You don't know that.
If you have a litter of wolves, and one of them
a recessive gene.
Brother Hovind, why would
humans that have hair? I didn't hear that.
Why would there be recessive genes if evolution is so limited?
I think the original genetic code in the Garden of Eden was complete and incredible. Probably Adam and Eve had an IQ of 500 or 2,000 or something, and they were probably huge and could run for hundreds of miles without getting tired. And we've all degenerated from that. That would be speculation on my part, and I'm not demanding that be taught in public schools. But I think people were designed perfect. I think all the animals were designed perfect. Do you think the original creation was perfect and it has now evolved 100%. Into something?
No, well,
so
I believe well, let me say this. I believe that whatever Adam named in the garden, must have looked a little bit different than what we got today. Do you not believe that?
I have no way of knowing. Adam, I don't know
But
what
I'm
the
just saying,
dogs look
based
like,
on
but
what we know about nature and how animals change, do you kind of wager that's the case?
no, I would say I would be scared to go down that street because uh, what Adam saw and named, let's say, an eagle. There are now 50 some varieties of eagles. They're still eagle. They're still bird. They still have feathers. They still lay
We
eggs.
don't know if Adam named what you and I would describe as an eagle.
Yeah, he probably spoke a different language. Okay, doesn't
No, I'm
matter.
just saying he might have named a bird that was eagle-esque, that was nothing too much like the eagles that we have today.
Well, what it says is 24 times in the first 7 chapters, they bring forth after their kind. If they're capable of bringing forth, i.e., mating and making babies, they're the same kind. Eagles and cows cannot make a baby.
Yeah,
So
but I mean, I think that's a bit of a strange thing to say too, because that was how it was in the beginning, right? We know, as you acknowledged earlier, that speciation can occur to such a degree that animals that we know to be related can't interbreed. So what you're describing is what the case was in the original creation. I don't think that's accounting for the genetic thing that has happened since then.
Also, gentlemen, we just now hit the 1 hour mark.
Okay.
So I'm going to leave it totally up to you guys. I don't know how much time you have to spare
I
with us,
just have one
Pastor
more
Hovind.
example if Brother Hovind, has time for it.
Well,
Yeah,
it
let's
was
just go-
that, but
we'll go-
also you guys did possibly have another topic that you were going to go over if time allotted, correct?
I mean, that's up to him. I would like to personally.
Yeah, if we can wait another week or two, we're hopefully going to get good internet out here, and then I won't have these problems. I'm going in and out all the time, so
Yeah, I hate that
I'd
for you,
rather
man.
shut it off soon here and do it again later. But
Sure.
I can't even hear him now.
Okay. Well, if you guys
Anyway,
want to go ahead
so
and
as
go
far as-
into your closing statements, and then if you have time for anyone who wants to ask a question.
Can I fit the one more example in before we do? Brother Hovind, I know you're familiar with I'm sure people have brought up the horse foot to you in the past, right?
How about the what now?
The horse's foot.
The horse's foot. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's kind of a big one, right? So the reason I wanted to bring it up, how familiar are you or associated, whatever the word would be, how much are you in agreement with Ken Ham, Answers in Genesis? Are you generally in agreement with them?
Yeah, we'd have a few theological differences and nothing major. During World War II, the Russians and the Americans were allies because we had a bigger enemy to fight called Hitler. So I look at our relationship that way. I probably recommend him a whole lot more than he recommends me. How's that?
That's because he's afraid of controversy, sir. So,
okay.
And I admire you because you're not. I do want to just go over a few notes here with the horse foot. And the reason I'm going over this, because I didn't realize this till about 3 weeks ago, but I was telling Stephen and Father Chuck and some of the guys that I just realized that the Ark Encounter, their display for the horse kind is actually Mesohippus, which is a multi-toed horse. I did not know that until recently, and I found that to be very interesting because that is Answers in Genesis acknowledging that they believe in fairly decent morphologic change in horses. So I wanted to just go over a few notes with the horse and just get your feedback on it.
Okay, so the horse going from 3-toed horse to 1-toed horse is losing, not gaining.
Well, let me go over the notes first.
Okay.
It won't take that long. I know we're pushing the time. So the Ark Encounter displays Mesohippus as the representative for the horse kind, showing that they believe it to be the ancestor of modern horses and zebras. If you look at the Eohippus fossils, the legs end in padded feet with 4 functional hooves on each forefoot and 3 on each hind foot, which is quite unlike the padded single foot of modern, equines. If you look at Mesohippus, which I believe is the one they displayed, the 4th toe on the forefoot is reduced, appearing vestigial. If you look at Merychippus, the pads were either absent or severely reduced, and the other 2 outside toes were smaller. Pliohippus, 1 toe remained, but the foot was still kind of down. And then modern equids, the foot is kind of up, the 1 toe, the toenail. So my point is, if we're acknowledging that a horse's ancestor went from a 4-toed flat foot to a 3-toed kind of raised foot to a 1-toed giant toenail weird foot like this, and you refuse to call that macroevolution, I don't know where you draw the line on macroevolution. If my foot did that, Brother Hovind, it'd be pretty weird, right?
Topic at a time. How do you know any of those are related?
We don't. That's what I was asking you.
No. somebody is lining up a 4-toed horse, a 3-toed horse, a tilted hoof, and a single hoof. You don't know any of them are related. Maybe all 4 are part of the original creation. Maybe they're still around today. Are there creatures today that have 3 toes and 4 toes?
Well, that's the reason I was asking you if you agreed with their exhibit.
I've not seen their exhibit. I don't know. I don't work for them. I don't know. If
Well,
what you're
there's only
describing is
2
quite a
options.
stretch.
Well, no, it's not
What's your-
stretch. There's only 2
Yeah.
options.
No,
Option number 1, go ahead.
you don't know that those 4 you named are related at all.
No,
You don't
I'm
know
going to
that
cover
one
that.
turned into the other.
Correct. I'm going to cover that. Option 1 is that Answers in Genesis is right and the horses are related, in which case they concede radical morphological change. That's a problem. Option number 2 is that none of these horses are related, and there were 4 or 5 or 6 different animals in the original creation that looked kind of horse-like, which opens up the floodgates to how many animals would have had to be on Noah's Ark.
Right. As I said, I don't work for them. I don't know what they display, and you don't know that those 4 are related. You're lining them up and drawing lines on paper, connecting them. The horse doesn't care.
They all look like a horse, though, in the face.
Well, maybe they don't turn them all loose together and see would they mate with each other, and they bring forth. But going from 4 toes to 1 toes is reducing, not improving. Are you aware of the fact that horses and almost all animals with hooves, before they're born, have a rubbery called a golden slippers, fairy fingers. They have foam pads or rubbery pads on their hoof before they're born, so they don't scratch the inside of the uterus and destroy the mother. And after they're born, over the next couple of days, they go away. Was that designed or did that evolve?
I believe it was designed and it evolved.
Oh, and evolved. Okay.
Well, I believe that the transition that we observe in nature, God is in control of that, obviously.
All right. When Jesus said in Matthew 19:4 and Mark 10:6 that the creation of Adam was the beginning of the world, you believe that?
Yes.
So then there's been no time for evolution. So then the world is only 6,000 years old.
I don't believe the Bible teaches that.
Okay. Well, we'll save that for another debate. We're out of camera battery here, and my phone is, I've got barely 1 bar. Let's do this again anytime. Or you come visit Lenox, Alabama, Dinosaur Adventureland. We'll do it live in our studio here.
I was just telling Stephen that I'd love to do the same thing.
He was. Yep.
It's free. I love it.
Pastor, do you think you have a couple minutes for if anybody wants to come on and ask you guys questions, or do you need to go?
Well, I'd have to go quick. We got about 7 minutes of battery left. Go ahead.
Okay, well, if anybody wants to come on and ask their question now, I do have one person in here. Let's see. Ghost Man, I added you. Do you have a question? Okay, Lupin, are you there with us? You there, Lupin?
Yeah, I was just meeting you on YouTube. Hello, how are you guys doing?
Good.
Okay, I wanted to ask Christian a question. Okay, pre-flood, we don't know exactly what the animals were exactly, but let's just say during the pre-flood, there was an animal that had all the traits of what we know as a common an elephant, except this elephant would also have fur. It'd be like it would have all the genes of a woolly mammoth, all the genes that a common elephant that we have today. This would be during the pre-flood, and then after it got off the ark through gene degradation, that would cause the elephants to slowly, they would lose their fur where they can't adapt to their environment. Would you say that's more possible than evolution, or do you think that is similar to evolution?
No, that is evolution.
But it didn't get better.
That's not really what that word means, Lupin. Evolution, you have to understand, the evolutionary process works like this. Certain kids are born, there's random, very minute mutations, and depending on either the anecdotal instances of chance or the general environment, certain of those mutations pass on their genetics to the next generation. So if in that environment, it was beneficial for the elephants that mutation led them away from fur to outsurvive the other elephants, that is exactly what Charles Darwin documented. That is what we call evolution.
can't agree with you that that would be evolution. I just think that would be losing of genetics and failure to adapt to its environment after the flood. I don't- I just that's how I feel. I don't know.
Yeah,
Don't think I can be
I'm just
convinced
taking
on
the
that.
position that that sort of process is what the Origin of Species was written to describe.
Pastor Hovind, did you want to also comment on that?
I did, yes, sir. Going from a woolly mammoth to a elephant. Elephants still have hair today, and there are very obvious similarities, with the huge tusks on the front, stuff like that. God might have actually just created a couple of different kinds of creatures, like the elephant and the mammoth, and one has not survived at all, as far as we know. There's no woolly mammoth still alive. The whole world not been thoroughly explored, but again, going from lots of hair like a mammoth to very little hair like a current elephant, African or Asian elephant, which Asian with smaller ears, is still an elephant. It's still recognizable, still the same kind. That process is not going to turn an amoeba into a bird, like Darwin taught. Darwin taught everything. All life forms are repeating. That's stupid.
Hey, Stump, did you have a question for Pastor Hovind or Christian?
I agree with Dr. Hovind.
Yeah, I do have a question for Christian. I think most questions are probably going to be for Christian because this is like a Christian channel. So
I think I'm a little off.
we spoke several times about this already, but Christian, as far as this evolution goes, you believe that God used evolution in his process of creation, right? Is that right? We understand.
It depends on if you're using creation the same word that the same way Brother Hovind's using the word. What Brother Hovind, I believe, is referring to is what science would call abiogenesis, and I do not believe in abiogenesis.
So, what part of the evolution process do you believe started that God used? At what point? Like, was it the
part that we still
amoeba?
observe today, survival of the fittest?
No. I'm saying, at what point of the evolution process? For instance, do you agree with that? Amoebas were first in the ocean and then they, transformed from there, or what part?
I don't know if amoebas were first in the ocean or not. There's probably amoebas on ocean and land.
Okay, but my point is, at what point of the evolution process that we understand to be evolution, and I'm not expert at evolution, but at what point do you think God started with?
I believe
evolution.
I agree with Brother Hovind when he says that there was original created kinds of animals. I believe that.
So, what part does evolution play?
Because after they were created, and after I presume after the fall, that's a bit of speculation, but that's a bit of theological speculation. But after the fall, evidently the process of selection began, and so it's evident that we don't know what those original created animals really looked like.
And I think you believe that man developed as part of evolution from other animals, right? Is that right?
That's a bit of a bigger conversation because that depends on if you consider this to be man or not, as me and you have discussed in the past. But the man that God created, when he said, I created man in my image, that was not a process of evolution. That was a special creation.
Now, guys, I will just remind you, we only have a couple more minutes with Pastor Hovind, so if you guys have any questions you want to direct towards him, now would be your opportune time. Go ahead, Ghost.
Oh, Mr. Hovind?
Yes.
Yeah. I heard before I looked this up before, they said we have genes from other species that if they turn on, we will look different. Why do you think that is?
Well, I
People
think
try
Microsoft,
to.
I think Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint have thousands, millions of identical lines of code. If I'm in my PowerPoint program, I click spell check. It probably takes me to the exact same dictionary as when I'm in Microsoft Word. I think the designer designed all the different creatures of the world with similar gene code for many reasons. The gene code is very complex, okay? And they do similar things. Many animals have two bones in the forearm or the foreleg or whatever, okay? That's a good design. It works. We can twist it around. Also, if there weren't some similarity between us and other animals, we could only eat each other. But the brown cow can eat the green grass and give the white milk, and I give the blonde hair by drinking it. So yes, the genetic similarities is not any help for evolution. That's just as much evidence of creation. General Motors uses a Tinnerman nut on 1,000 different places on their car. So does the Honda, so does the Toyota. It's a good design that works. Slip the nut on, it stays in place without having to hold it. A Tinnerman nut, you can look that up. So the fact that they all use this design is evidence of design. I think almost all the cars I've seen have round tires rather than square triangle ones. So it's a good design. It works.
One more thing. Here's this guy. It's a very rare condition, but they say here's a mutation can cause his genes to turn on. He has hair over his face. Like they kind of say that genes were from what they say common ancestor. But he have hair over his face. Why would he have genes like that?
Well, they're called the wolf people. I think there was a family that had those. I forget where that was exactly, but I saw a picture of it the other day. Where was it? Mexico, yes, okay. And they had hair. People already have hair on their head. To have excess hair, some people today have more hair than others. But again, that's not adding anything. It's just more of what you already have, hair. And there are pores all over your face. Could each of those pores produce a hair? Maybe so. Is that a helpful mutation? Or no? You want to marry one?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just real briefly. I thought the question was very interesting. So me and Brother Hovind just a few minutes ago discussed the idea of recessive genes. Well, scientists like to play with stuff in the lab, as people know, and nothing more than life. That's the thing they always want to play with. And this group of scientists likes to turn on and off recessive genes to see what they can produce in embryos. And one of the recessive genes in chickens and just jungle fowl in general, of course, is teeth. That's one of the ones everybody knows about. So they can go in there and genetically alter the embryo to turn on the recessive gene so that the baby chicken is born with teeth that really don't do anything. They're just kind of there. But it begs the question, why is there a recessive gene for teeth? So it is perfectly reasonable to assume that that chicken had an ancestor with teeth.
Yeah, that may be correct. That's not gaining anything. That's losing. Going from a chicken with teeth to a chicken. I mean,
Winning
some birds have
versus
teeth.
losing is based on whatever's fittest in that environment.
But still, there are no examples of gaining new information. It did not gain, the chicken did not gain any information. It already has information to make teeth. They have an egg tooth to break through the egg. And there's the Panamanian hummingbird has teeth in its beak. Several other birds have teeth like that. It's unusual, but there are some that do. But again, if all the chickens used to have teeth, and now they don't, what would that prove? That's not evolution. It didn't gain anything. It lost.
I would argue that is textbook evolution.
Okay. I know you would, because you're desperate for evidence for your theory. I know you'd argue. Yeah.
Like the teeth gene, yeah.
All right. Are there any more questions for Dr. Hovind?
Well, Stephen, count me in to do this again. If you get any evolutionists want to defend Darwinian evolution, which says birds and bananas are related, I'm not exactly sure where Christian wants to draw the line. Sounds like he wants to ride both horses at the same time, and they're going out.
I just want to believe whatever's true.
You got long legs.
Would you guys like to do this again next Sunday?
Okay.
I don't know if I could do next Sunday, Stephen. I don't want to commit to something I'm not sure about, but I would love to do it again.
Yeah, let me check on my internet, Stephen. They're working on finally getting internet out here.
Brother,
more people in Dinosaur Adventureland than the whole town of Linux.
That's accurate.
Yeah.
Yep.
Real briefly, I know you've got to go real quick. I just wanted you to know I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, and maybe I can make it down there sometime and we can do this in person, eat dinner and stuff.
That would be great. We'll give you the real tour of Dinosaur Adventureland.
I had it once. You just don't remember me. You don't remember me.
You look familiar. We've had 71 countries now.
In the meantime, before you guys meet, if you want to have these discussions, I'd be happy to host them.
All right. Stephen, we are going to be putting up stuff live on drdino.com, DRDINO. From there, it'll go to, 15 other platforms, Rumble and Genesis Baptist Church on YouTube, and several other platforms. But just keep an eye on drdino.com. We're going to be on everything. All right. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Pastor.
Okay.